Hello, my name is Dr. Mike Nelson. For those of you that don't know me, I've practiced for the last 40 years in the healthcare field. And like the rest of you, I'm sheltering in place. It is hard to find things to do when we're all so used to being busy. But find things to do we must. We can't lay on the couch. We can't move from room to room, hoping that there's something new in the refrigerator. We've been telling our children not to play video games all day long. And now it's what we're doing. So, in order to make that easier, in order to make it helpful, I thought I'd share some stories of practice. Maybe to amuse you, maybe to remind you of stories that you might have that you need to share. And once you realize that underneath that big load of laundry that you'll get around to folding pretty soon is an exercise bike or a treadmill, and you take it out for a spin, then sit on the couch, and while your heart rate returns to normal, I'll tell you a story. Now, these stories are stories that I've had of patient encounters. Most of them are mine. Some of them have been related to me by other healthcare practitioners. All of them are interesting. Some are funny. Some are hilarious. Some not so much. But right now, while our healthcare workers are trying so hard to make sure that we all are safe, I thought I'd let you know what it's like sometimes from the other side. So today we'll talk about our friend Jean. Now, Jean was one of those people who brought sunshine and light to absolutely nobody. Jean was a cantankerous, bossy, somewhat angry individual. And she never failed to set the staff off the minute she walked in the door. Now, you could always tell that it was Jean coming through the door because she was walking, dragging a long tube that was attached to a cannula in her nose and was on a wheeled oxygen tank so that she could breathe because she had terrible emphysema. She had terrible emphysema and a horrible smoking habit. 2 or 3 packs a day smoking habit. The fingers on her left hand were all stained yellow from her cigarettes, which she lit one right after the other. But her right hand was clean because she had to pull her oxygen out and hold it over her head every time she took a puff. She had never married, and she lived in her mother's house that she had inherited when her mother passed away. She drove a beautiful, old, classic Buick that was as big as the HMS Titanic. And you could tell it was her coming down the street because it looked like there was nobody driving the car. She looked out under the steering wheel and held her cigarette out the vent window as she went down the street. But there was no mistaking her. Now, she never came in with an appointment. She always just expected to be seen. And when she was told that she should stop smoking, or at least shorten it, she would just say, "It won't help me to live one day longer. It'll just feel that way to me." So, over the course of time, Jean started to develop problems driving and getting around. And so she arranged with me to have me come to her house so that I could see her there. And she set these appointments up on Friday afternoon. And when the staff knew that I was going to Jean's house, they rolled their eyes and wished me luck and made the sign of a cross. Now, what I didn't tell them was I enjoyed the visits. Jean would sit on a chair in the front window that had been built up with a little stage, so she was high enough to see over the windowsill. And she would watch for me. And as soon as I came in the driveway, she would deal a hand of gin rummy, and she would have something laid out for lunch. She was very up to date on affairs. She was a former school teacher. She knew her stuff, and she would quiz me and stimulate me into thinking about all kinds of different things. So while we brunched and she beat the crap out of me at gin rummy, I would learn all kinds of things about the world. Now, eventually, Jean had trouble with stairs, and she couldn't make the trip around the house anymore. Most of the housekeepers had quit on her because she was ornery. And the neighbor kids were terrified of her, but they still cut her grass. But eventually, she couldn't drive anymore, and she finally gave up the house, and she moved into the local nursing home, where she terrorized the entire staff, with the exception of one person. That person, whose name was Dorothy, was the head nurse. And she didn't knuckle for anybody. She didn't take any crap, and with very few exceptions, the hospital staff, the nursing room staff, and all the rest of us referred to her as Nurse Ratchet, as in one flew from the cuckoo's nest. I got sun on my face. At any rate, Nurse Ratchet also didn't really care for me all that much, mostly because I liked a good joke, and she saw no purpose in that at all. Now, we still played cards, but now Jean had to eat in the communal dining room. But she also used a walker now, and so it was very handy because she could carry an oxygen bottle in the walker when she went outside to smoke. Now, because I worked rurally and because of the nature of the beast, I often did house calls, not just for Jean, but for many people. We had a large Amish community. So I was used to the phone ringing in the middle of the night. Well, one night the phone rang, no surprise there, and I got up and I answered it, and I was probably pretty sleepy. And I said, "Hello, this is Dr. Nelson." And the voice on the other end of the line was one of the local docs in town. "Hey, Mike, I'm sorry to bother you at this time of the night, but I got a little problem." "Oh, really? What's the problem, Jim?" "Well, Jean fell out of bed tonight, and she made a heck of a racket. Now, they called me over, and I checked her out, and she seems okay, but she won't settle down, and she says she needs to see you. And I'm afraid she's woken up everybody on the floor already. I gave her a sedative, and it doesn't seem to be having any effect. But she says she's still hurting. What do you think?" And I said, "Jim, I'll tell you what, I'll come on in. It'll be a little while. I got to get dressed and drive into town, but I'll be along in about 40 minutes. He said, "Well, okay, we'll keep her busy until then, and thanks a lot." So 40 minutes later, it took me about 5 minutes to talk Jean down, and she crawled into bed, and we told her to, settle down and stop being such a pain, and we adjourned. Now, in this nursing home, like most of them, there's a front desk, and in the evenings, there's a very short staff. And so we stopped at the coffee urn, got a couple of paper cups of coffee, and my friend Jim sat down behind the nurse's station and put his feet up. And he looked pretty beat. He was dressed in his scrubs, looked like he hadn't slept. His hair was all messed up. And so I leaned on the counter, and we just kind of toasted each other and sipped this terrible burnt coffee. Well, about the third sip, our friend Nurse Ratchet shows up. And she says, once she gave me a scowl, she said to Dr. Jim, Doctor, Jean has gotten out of bed. And she went across the hall and she got into bed with Mr. Rutledge. What do you want me to do? Well, Jim looked at me. He looked at the nurse. He looked back at me and winked. He looked at her and said, close the door. So, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, let me know. And there are plenty more if you're interested. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.